podcast, Hate Nonsense. It's the PoliticsJOE podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Yay!
Here's from the gallery.
It's just Andrea in the gallery. That's the most high energy interaction I've heard in a long time. We've got... Is this an emergency podcast? Are we sounding the klaxon?
I'm going to say we were always planning to do this podcast,
but we were
even before the news came out.
That's right. We're doing 2 hours on the Hamilton by-election, guys. Strap in. No, that's a lie. I'm Ed Campbell, by the way, joined by Laura Beveridge. Mm-hmm. I also kind of remembered that sometimes this might be the first podcast that someone listens to.
Yeah, I think so.
Does seem frightening.
Yeah, lucky them.
Lucky them.
What day?
Drop a comment on which episode they should listen to if this is their first ever one to really get up to speed, because this might be more newsy than it normally is. So we're going to talk about we are going to talk about the Hamilton by-election, probably 5 minutes right at the end. We're also going to talk about Zia Yusuf resigning from Reform, but in the meantime, goodness me, Musk v Trump. What the bloody fuck is going on there?
Who could have seen this coming? Two egomaniacs.
Yeah. Is this like, it's like what, immovable force? No, unstoppable force versus immovable objects. Just two colossal egos with enormous platforms. Match made in heaven.
I feel like it was always going to end like this. Like, this is the only way this could have ended, with a massive blow up, because like we said, both of their egos are so huge. And I think both expecting each other to bend to the other's will, like almost a kind of, battle of attrition between who's more powerful, the president or the world's richest man. Should we run people up to speed, maybe if they haven't been on Twitter recently?
I just don't think there's anyone in our audience who wasn't on Twitter last night. Do you think our audience are Twitter or Blue Sky? I think they're still on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm going to say they're still on Twitter.
I think they're still listening to Kanye, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I think they are. Take that as you will. So, Elon Musk was the first buddy, like an unofficial... he was an official advisor, but he gave himself the unofficial title of first buddy, the Doge father, the head of the Department of Government Efficiency. I was about to say the Department of the Office of Government Efficiency. And he stepped down last week in kind of like slightly mysterious circumstances.
But quite amicable. There was the kind of press...
big fucking bruise in his eye.
Yeah. Which was like really... There's an interesting like briefing that came out, not about the bruise, but about there had been a screaming match between Musk and a Treasury Secretary that had apparently got physical.
Jesus.
Unrelated to the bruise.
We don't, well...
Officially.
Basically, because since Musk stepped into kind of frontline politics, Tesla's stock has absolutely tanked. It's absolutely like he's lost so much money. Like GDP's worth of money has been lost from his like personal fortune. And it fell
another 14% again yesterday. And it's like
so much money.
Elon Musk is a case study in like alienating your market, because first he lost the Democrats, and now he's lost the Republicans, and now Trump is threatening to withdraw subsidies and contracts from the US government. The sales have tanked in Europe. Like, Tesla's biggest problem is its CEO.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you might wonder, like, is it like market forces that's done this? Like, EV sales have like gone up in Europe, or like doing like the market is there for sure. People are making a deliberate decision not to buy Teslas as a result. Like, and the only thing you can point to is Elon Musk's just absolutely insane cat-fueled public persona.
I think what's interesting as well is actually maybe this like EV subsidy thing is at the heart of this dispute, because Trump's big, beautiful bill, which is basically the Republican spending package, which he's trying to get through Congress just now, didn't include electric vehicle subsidies anymore. Trump said, Elon was wearing thin. I asked him to leave. I took away his EV mandate that forced everyone to buy electric cars that nobody else wanted, that he knew for months I was going to do, and he just went crazy. Musk denied this. He said, whatever, keep the EV solar incentive cuts in the bill, even though no oil and gas subsidies are touched. Very unfair. But ditch the mountain of disgusting pork in the bill. In the entire history of civilization, there has never been legislation that's both big and beautiful. Everyone knows this. Either you get big and ugly bill or slim and beautiful bill. Slim and beautiful is the way.
Oh, is he talking about women?
He's fat shaming the bill.
And also for context, like pork refers to like pork barreling, which is like just American term, like corruption in public life. yeah, it's the MAGA coalition of like the Silicon Valley tech right versus like the nativist America first sort of thing they're not natural allies necessarily, and you saw that with the dispute about the visas. Was that last year? That was like towards the end of last year. Or was that
Yeah,
beginning
it
of
was
this year?
pretty soon at the beginning of this year. Yeah.
Whenever, because like the tech industry in America is looking to recruit like the best engineers, software developers from around the world. So those visas are pretty useful for them. If you're an American first nativist, you're like, whoa, Indian people here in this country. No way, but so there's been like pretty public fallout. We haven't really touched on the most insane thing, the nuclear bomb that was dropped by Elon last night, in which he claims that the reason the Epstein files, quote, haven't been made public is because Trump is in them. I'm sure Trump would strenuously deny that, and there's no evidence to suggest that. A few things there. If you knew this about Donald Trump and you stopped working with him because you were losing money and you are like your EV subsidies are not going to be there, you are a total scumbag. Like
Yeah.
what you're accusing him of is like being involved in like sex trafficking, like having sex with children. That's what that was
Yeah.
being accused of. And you are parading your own child round with them. Like, does he think he's coming out of the hero?
I mean,
as this?
I think it's just Elon Musk engaging in real schoolyard politics. Like he is reverting to, well, I'm backed into a corner, I'm gonna call someone a pedophile. Like we saw him do that. We saw him do that with the
Quite knee-jerk.
yeah, but we've seen him do it before with the diver that rescued
Yeah.
the boys that were trapped in a cave. And when his robots weren't chosen and a diver had managed to save the boys instead, he accused that diver, completely unfounded, by the way, of being a pedophile.
But I think it was more egregious than that. It wasn't even like a robot. It was like the guy, Elon Musk was like, yeah, we've actually designed a submarine.
Oh, a
to do
submarine.
this. And the divers were like, are you fucking kidding? Like, it's the crevices are like in the underwater are like this big. That obviously won't work. He's like, fuck.
Pedophile.
Pedophile, you must. Well, if you don't agree with me, you must be a pedophile. Have you watched the rehearsal at all?
No, what's that?
So it's a Nathan Fielder project. Do you know Nathan?
Oh yeah,
Fielder?
Nathan for you.
So
yeah.
it's like, this season is basically about like aviation safety, and it's amazing, this program, and I'm not going to spoil it all. But there's a bit at the end where he argues that if you are in a cockpit, you can't have anything wrong with you. Therefore, that must mean you are normal. And there's a whole discussion about like whether or not pilots are disclosing things like ADHD, like mental health issues, because if they do that, then they might be struck off as a pilot, might lose their license. Struck off, probably not the right term for that. But that is like, it's like the same logic of like, oh, you don't agree with me, therefore you are a pedophile.
Yeah.
Like, it's the same kind of ipso facto thing. It's just been remarkable to see it all unfold in real time. There was
Yeah.
a wonderful suggestion that Donald Trump has been made king big plays about him giving asylum to like white Afrikaners,
Yeah.
to white South Africans, and that is like the South African quote white genocide, which isn't happening, is like a big talking point of like this South African like Silicon Valley class. And there's been a suggestion that he's going to pivot to like being on the side of like Julius Malema shouting like kill the poor.
And does this fallout harm Donald Trump?
Oh, he suggests, right, there's a suggestion from Musk that he is personally responsible for Trump's victory with his money. And Musk does have enough cash to fund sort of like challengers to like MAGA endorsed incumbents or like candidates. Whether or not that will actually materialize, that you saw, was there like a I can't remember which state it was in, but there was like was it like a judge, an election to be like, it was like a state official, I think somewhere in the Midwest, and Musk made a big play about, I endorse this candidate for these reasons, And everyone there was like, what the fuck do you know about Wisconsin politics? Get fucked. And that person didn't win. So I think maybe his influence has been overstated. Trump remains the man in those sort of circles, I would say. Musk, like, don't know, is kind of soiling himself publicly, and is like a true believer, I guess, in that project would just eat the billions of dollars lost. If you were like, and I think the one thing about MAGAism and support for Trump is you have to be like a blooded believer, and they really value that. They don't really like how they talk about like Mike Pence now. It's absolutely insane. And I think Musk is kind of straying to that territory.
Definitely. I think Elon Musk has and still does massively over egg his own popularity. And like the idea that he could set up an alternative party that would challenge MAGA is just ridiculous, because at the end of the day, all that the MAGA movement is, all that the Republican Party is just now, is a cult of personality of Donald Trump. And so no one can challenge that, because the party is synonymous with now Donald Trump. And I think to the same effect, it's what we're seeing with Reform in the UK, is that Zia Yusuf exiting the Reform Party, the same way Rupert Lowe did, has no effect on Reform's polling or popularity, because at the end of the day, Reform is just a cult of personality of Nigel Farage.
I disagree. I agree with that it's the same, but for different reasons, I think. I think ultimately the infighting doesn't matter to voters. They're voting for change, I would argue. I wouldn't necessarily say that people are voting Reform just because of Farage. I think we can come to that later on when we're kind of talking about Hamilton. You made such an insightful point, and I wanted to do such a dumb chat about.
No, do it.
No,
yeah, please.
You don't have to indulge it, please. That's so humiliating. That's like sometimes I show my girlfriend like videos I find funny, and she's like just not enjoying it at all. No, we can come back to it. I think the people are voting for, like, you see this infighting about like Westminster infighting about Rupert Lowe resigning, Zia Yusuf resigning, and I think to a lot of people, MAGA and reformers avenues for change is not necessarily just about the figure at the top. The figure at the top could, the figure at the top could be like the reason you might love that person, but if you're looking for change, I'm not sure it's like you're weighing up, do I want my life to get better versus how do I feel about the person at the top? And I think, do I want my life to get better is a more of a factor.
I feel like I disagree.
That's interesting.
I feel like if Farage or Trump were to, for some reason, exit public life tomorrow, I think the movements both fall apart, or like completely derailed. They factionalize, they split. It doesn't become the movement, because the movement is synonymous with them.
Yeah.
And they are the front of it. And because I think anyone in Hamilton who voted Reform, I don't think Zia Yusuf leaving the party, they're like, oh, well, I regret my vote for Reform now because they've kicked Zia Yusuf out, or Zia Yusuf is left.
But also they didn't say it was because they liked Farage. What they said to us was stop the votes and immigration. And Reform is synonymous with like those policies, I would say. And I think that like that's what I think was more of a factor. And Reform came in a restraint to Hamilton, which they didn't want. Retention was going to plummet. But I'll make this point and then we'll go back to riffing on Musk.
Yeah.
Don't worry, guys. Reform got 8,000 votes with like hardly any party infrastructure there, like barely any, compared to like the SNP and Scottish Labour, who are well-drilled machines.
Organized.
Like, that is incredible. So with no ground game, essentially, Reform did that.
Yeah.
And I think there is just like that, people looking for change, and Reform is that vessel at the moment. And Farage isn't like that popular in Scotland. Like he came up to Scotland this week and just kind of talked Scotland down, being like, "Oh, we're going to get rid of like the Barnett consequentials," and and he's only been to Scotland like what 3 times in the past 10 years, and so they still managed that without his actual influence.
We will go back to Musk, but just like on that point, I think the fact that Farage feels now emboldened enough that he can visit Scotland and be welcomed on doorsteps. The fact that they can drive a reform bus around Hamilton and Lark Hall, and rather than people throwing things at it, hurling abuse, they're getting cars honking and people shouting reform. When previously, when Nigel Farage came up during the Brexit debate, he was literally chased out of Edinburgh. A riot van had to be called in to get him away safely. I think something fundamentally has shifted in Scottish politics.
We'll go to park that. You lot don't like Scottish politics. Are we going to see a reflexive pivot by Musk to just like ultra woke, just real die hard, like I'm the woke father now?
That would be, I think, the Democrats, if there are any Democrats considering working with Musk, reaching out to Musk, doing anything with Musk, they are gravely like misinformed about his popularity or what the Democratic voters want. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it'd be funny though.
Yeah.
You know, in like, have you watched Succession?
No, I haven't.
Oh, for God's sake.
Sorry.
It's awful. It's a bit.
Ed mansplains TV shows to me.
It's not mansplaining if you don't know about it. That's just explaining. We have clearly had this argument before to women on the tube. It's spreading. It's just spreading. Do you know Kendall Roy? How much do you know?
Yeah, I know like who the characters are.
Right.
Okay.
Kendall Roy becomes like just a public figure and just tweets things like the future is female, stuff like that. It'd be good if there's just a real pivot and Musk like embraces like his trans daughter now.
He's endorsing AOC.
Yeah, God. Gets rid of like all the weird eugenicsy stuff about like breeding his own private army. Gets back, apologizes to Grimes. I don't know what for. He probably has something to apologize for.
Oh, he doesn't let her see her kids.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, definitely apologize for that. Or maybe stop that. Does he have full custody of that?
I don't know if he has full custody, but like Grimes's mum has like tweeted him before being like, please let Grimes see her child.
Jesus.
Yeah, because he's like blocked them on everything else.
Yeah, instead of like DMing women and stop trying to sleep with them and just giving them book recommendations. Listening to bell hooks.
Yeah.
The next time we see Elon Musk, he's wearing like this is what a feminist.
Mandela shirt.
Visiting Robben Island.
Yeah.
He's taking what courses at like is Bernard.
He's a critical race theory scholar.
Yeah, critical race theory scholar. He's at UC Berkeley doing a sit-in. It's just good to watch it all unfold, isn't it? And I think that is what we're seeing with reform in the UK. Just the fights are in public, which does seem to be there's like no really lack of discipline. It's sort of like what do we call those like populist radical right?
Yeah.
It's just there's no internal discipline. It's just like I think each person prominent in it thinks they are the main one because there are so few of them that you can kind of have like an outsized influence versus like say you're like a backbench Labour MP at this point. What like and you start going as the party, they're like fucking whip removed, get fucked.
Although I do think people that have challenged Nigel have faced that similar consequences to that though. And I think interestingly, Zia Yusuf was actually brought in he was the chairman of the party. He was also the chairman of Scottish Reform as well, and left the party on the David Hamilton by-election. But I think that he was brought in to professionalize reform and basically turn it from being like what you said, 5 disparate MPs into some form of party structure with a whip system. And also he was in charge of professionalizing the party at a kind of grassroots organizing level. He had a role in the Doge of councils and was really attributed with a lot of the success that reform had at local elections. So it does leave and he was also a donor to the party. So with Zia Yusuf gone, actually there might not be a swing in popularity because he wasn't that popular a figure with the public. He wasn't generally that well known. But internally, in terms of like structure and organization of the party, he was doing quite a lot of work there that now there'll be a gap.
I think his role had been like reduced like last week. his roles have been like given out to different people,
Mm-hmm.
and there's suggestions of bringing some other people in who Zia Yusuf did not want to work with. An interesting factor as well, he owns 50% of the party,
Yeah.
which is incredible. Which is like most parties don't have that problem. They don't have like shareholder
Mm-hmm.
concerns, I guess. Yeah, it's just like a fascinating psychodrama
Mm-hmm.
of all these things being like, and it comes back from, I'm sure they talked about the question on Wednesday's episode about PMQs, where the kind of the most public spat was Zia Yusuf calling Reform's new MP who asked about banning the burqa. That's a dumb thing
Mm-hmm.
to do. I think insane to do that in public
Mm.
as a political party.
Mm.
Why are you not handling that discipline internally? Even if like you have the confidence of Nigel Farage, which I think Zia Yusuf seems to, like Nigel Farage seems to be talking about Zia Yusuf leaving in sort of like regretful terms. But why on earth would you not communicate that internally? There's no upside apart from unless you consider yourself
Mm-hmm.
the main character
Mm-hmm.
to chastising someone that way.
Mm-hmm. I also think that something Nigel Farage mentioned on the broadcast round in the aftermath of this was the amount of hate that Zia Yusuf got online and like Islamophobic hate. I mean, we saw like Katie Hopkins, like his name is Zia Yusuf, but she was like referring to him as Muhammad, which is just like
Ooh.
straight up like Islamophobia.
Yeah,
And
from Katie Hopkins.
but at the same time, it's like you were the chairman of the Reform Party. Like it's like why I don't really know what like point I'm trying to
Are you trying
make.
to say what did you expect?
Yeah, but I mean, no one should have to expect that. But at the same time, like the party baits that sort of behavior.
Yeah, and like, do you think he was like naive about it, or like being disingenuous about what he was expecting from that base?
I don't know, but it's one of those things where it's like, you know, if the dogs are following you, you're probably whistling to them. So it's that sort of. It isn't like a well, what did you expect? Because at the end of the day, no one deserves that.
Mm-hmm.
But it is sort of like that. I mean, that sort of behavior would be totally unacceptable in the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. But in Reform, those voters seem to have a place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they're not afraid of courting
Yeah.
that, and that's what, and I guess that's why that Sarah, I forgot her name, Sarah
Poachin.
felt confident enough to stand up
Exactly.
and say, it's not like the people of Runcorn are coming up to her desperate
Yeah.
to ban the burqa. It's like here's my moment, first ever moment on the national stage.
Yeah.
This is my politics.
Exactly.
Yeah, which shouldn't surprise any of us. So Nigel, do you think this will matter? This will affect Reform?
No.
What actually further down the line? It actually, like, what people always say about Nigel Farage is that all of his like projects just blow up.
Yeah.
There isn't either he can't or he doesn't attract people who can like compromise. I guess like, and at the moment there's sort of, who are the big players in Reform? Him,
Richard Tice.
just like, who seems to be a bit of a lapdog. He got cucked at the last election.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, oh yes, I'm so happy I'm not fully drunk. Shut up.
Lee Anderson.
Lee Anderson, all of whom I think are popular for different reasons.
Yeah, definitely.
But also believe they're getting high on their own supply. They believe the hype about themselves. I think they all think they could do the job by themselves. James McMurdoch doesn't really say anything publicly. And Rupert Lowe like has now just gone on like what he was when he was even within the party, was kind of grandstanding and like publicly disputing. So it would be it'd be interesting whether like I kind of have a feeling that support for Reform will remain kind of constant even if the party is in total disrepair.
Yeah, I agree.
So whether or not, so say they win the next election, would they have like enough people willing to work together to be in the cabinet? Or like, and would you be able to have like a functioning, because you can actually kind of see a world where there's a majority of like or plurality of, it would be a majority, plurality of the vote, majority of the seats, majority of MPs and sort of like Reform MPs in like name only, they're all their own factions, refusing to like form a government.
Yeah,
And we end up with sort of like a bizarre reform opposition to a reform government.
definitely.
And like Nigel Farage can't form a government and it collapses
Mm-hmm.
after a day, a week, a month, 6 months. And we end up with another election quite soon afterwards.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe if you are a conservative just now, you feel like maybe there's two options, which is one, I'm going to like make hay while the sun shines. I'm going to defect to reform and maybe have a chance of holding onto my seat. Or there's maybe a sort of like, we're going to wait until this implodes. And
Yeah.
then we'll have been away from the public eye for enough time that actually then we can come back as the opposition after they implode.
Well, it's like sunlight is the best disinfectant at the moment. Is like, okay, we'll let them have their moment. They're popular now. Because the election won't, 4 years is a long time. And so, and this is happening in like a week. Like, so this Zia Yusuf week sets up Doge, quits in 4 days. So if that's in 4 days, what will happen in 4 years?
Exactly.
For those people, will we have the same makeup of MPs at the next parliament? Possibly, possibly not.
Did you have a favourite tweet or meme about the Trump Musk?
I think the best one was Trump's foreign policy, and it was a clip of like Julius Malema's youth movement singing the song about killing the bird. That was very good. What about you?
I really enjoyed Who Gets Custody of JD Vance.
That's good.
Yeah.
he was recording a podcast with Theo Vaughn.
I know,
like
right?
yesterday.
What a mad time to have the vice president on your podcast.
I know.
Do you think he asked him hard-hitting journalistic questions?
I think he probably. Oh, probably like. It was probably like, what the fuck's going on?
Yeah.
Which I guess is like
Fair enough.
anyone interviewing JD fans would be
Yeah.
asking, what the fuck is going on,
Yeah.
JD? And Musk actually as well, I think he certainly tweeted approvingly or like liked or retweeted someone saying JD Vance needs to be president now.
Yeah.
So if Musk is going to like split up the Trump Vance dream team as well, God, it's just a wonderful time to be on the internet.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, bad day for Tesla stock, but probably a pretty good day for Twitter.
Yes, it's actually. Yeah, and actually, and Truth Social.
So true.
That's where.
I was enjoying how they had to screenshot each other to reply to each other.
Yeah, it's funny. It's just good. It's just good. It's just good. It's like quite old fashioned of like press barons.
Yeah.
Just like front pages.
Yeah.
Being like, that's quite an old fashioned thing to do. They should bring that back. So this is completely apropos of nothing. You know, like communist parties
Yeah.
in the UK. Why are they still printing newspapers? Why is that a good use of their time?
I feel like they're being romantic about socialism. Like it.
Yeah, but like, who's like?
You want them to like effectively organize online.
Why aren't they? Why are they like you? If you follow like actually, and please forgive me, there are so many of them.
Yeah.
That I'm probably going to use the wrong name with the wrong activity.
Yeah.
But it's like, great news, comrades. We spent a week handwriting this newspaper. We're going to distribute it outside. Great news, we made 50. We're going to distribute this around like one tube station. Like, you know, it was an information revolution. You don't hear about the dot-com boom,
Yeah.
friend.
Yeah. In fact, I think Marx was quite into how technology changes communication, but they missed that boat.
And what Marx was just talking about the printing press. That's
Yeah.
what Marx would say about the internet.
Definitely.
There's a dissertation there.
Credit Ed if you write that dissertation.
We were cited in someone's an academic work, certainly.
way.
Yeah, it was like there's a boy I know from uni was studying a postgrad in something, and I can't remember what it was. It might have been a dissertation, it might not have been, but he sent me like the footnote, and it was like, what would it be? Campbell, Dugmore, Santina,
Oh my god.
brackets 2024, close brackets, and there was like a link, and it was like fucking probably like non-hunting and beavers or something like that.
Yeah.
Which was cool. So let us know if you're also citing us.
Yeah. Please do.
Also, good luck in your A levels. Do you have any other messages for the audience to get out there?
Should we talk about Hamilton?
Yes. Goodness me. What a night for Scottish Labour. Bloody hell.
Should we were there for Tuesday and Wednesday.
Yes.
Kind of on the campaign trail.
Yes.
You spoke to Anna Sarwar, John Swinney, and Ross Lammy, who was the Reform candidate.
Yep.
And as you said, Labour won. Was when you were interviewing those people, was that the feeling that you were getting? Was that the outcome that you thought was going to happen?
It wasn't what they thought was going to happen. The SNP were kind of trumpeting about it being a two-horse race between the SNP and Reform, when in reality, Labour won. Should we get the numbers up, actually?
I've got them here.
Oh, you got them? Are they there?
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me.
So, Labour won with 31.6% of the vote, the SNP on 29.4%, and Reform on 26.1%, and the Conservatives with 6% of the vote.
Yeah, and the Lib Dems lost their deposit, I think, as well. There was, and also the turnout was like 44% or something. It was like, so this was like the by-election for the Scottish Parliament for Hamilton, Larkhall, and Stonehouse, which was called when the SNP incumbent, passed away earlier this year. So it was a kind of a race that the SNP certainly didn't want to fight. It was really interesting because it's a test for the SNP government in Scotland, the Labour government on the UK level, Reform as a litmus test to see how well they could have done in Scotland. And nobody thought Labour were going to win this. I was saying to Laura before, Aberdeen were given better odds on beating Celtic in the Scottish Cup final than Labour were to hold or to win this seat. And our reporting on it has kind of focus on Reform, and that's sort of, I guess, because we're beholden to this audience and they do not like Scottish politics. Prove me wrong and watch my interview with John Swinney, please, and Anna Sarwar. That'd be really helpful. Because we always keep doing Scottish politics, but we need it. We certainly need some audience interest.
There's an election there next year. Let's go.
And what was interesting was like the Reform sort of dominated certainly the media coverage. I think there was a vacuum because Labour weren't putting their successful candidate Davy Russell kind of do media appearances because he was dreadful at them. There was like an interview with ITV Borders, I think it was, and it was one of the worst interviews I've ever seen a politician give. So there was sort of like an information vacuum that the SNP, to a certain extent, and definitely Reform were allowed to occupy. Reform were running this like appalling advert suggesting that Anna Sarwar, the leader of Scottish Labour, was like going to govern just in favour of like Pakistanis, using words that he didn't say, suggesting that he'd said this. Nigel Farage doubled down on it. We spoke to every Reform person we spoke to said, well, we think that's what he means, which is obviously just disingenuous. Because if you know anything about Anna Sarwar, like that's absolutely not what he believes at all. And there was, but when you spoke to people on the ground, I think we met more people who said they were going to vote Labour than anything else, I think.
Yes, I think so too.
Because the candidate, Davy Russell, what everyone kept saying about him was everybody knows him. He seemed to have just been like a guy about town, like a really prominent sort of local figure, which I think everyone likes to pretend their candidate is, but this does seem to be true.
Yeah, no, because he hasn't stood as a politician before, I believe. This is his first time running as a politician. And I think that was really prominent, is that people did recognise his name. Interestingly, he probably won in spite of Keir Starmer's Westminster government and probably showed that, well, John Swinney has really managed to stabilise the SNP after a really turbulent time, that there is still more work for Swinney to do to win back voters to the SNP. I think what was interesting is when Davy Russell won, he said that this is clearly showing a rejection of Farage's poisonous politics in Scotland, but that's just not true. Reform went from having single digits in that constituency to winning 26%. Effectively, each party, 31, 29 and 26, these are single-digit percentage points. They all got roughly the same share of the vote. So it is absolutely not a rejection. If anything, it's like a testament to how well Reform have done in just a few years to be almost neck and neck with Labour and the SNP.
And the SNP, I actually think it's a rejection of the SNP more than anything. I made this point to John Swinney, and I wasn't totally convinced by his answer. In that, so say the word that kept coming up, and I kind of found it quite trite, and I used it as well in our piece, was like scunnered, which is a Scottish word, which kind of means just fed up. And it's kind of like a touch point of, and every politician we spoke to clearly been like, this is just like the phrase that we're using. And there's like the scunnered effect, and people in Scotland, the same way across like the UK entirely, have lots to be scunnered about, like all the things that if you don't live in Scotland, but in Scotland specifically, like the NHS waiting list is projected to be like 1 million by December 2026. Scotland is still the #1 country in Europe for like drug deaths by like, and just it's such an outlier in Europe, and it has been for years and years and years and years. House building targets aren't being met, and when I put this to John Swinney just rolled off the same 5 or 6 achievements the SNP always talk about, and it's literally been the same, I think, since Alex Salmond was First Minister. Like, what was it, like tuition fees, prescription charges abolished, and there wasn't anything that recent that he pointed to, as far as I can remember. And if you are someone in Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse voting for change, why would you vote for the party that has been in power since 2007?
I actually thought what was really interesting when we were speaking to people was just how local the issues in this by-election were. Apart from a few of the people that said they were going to vote reform, immigration was not brought up as an issue that mattered to people. The issue that was coming up over and over and over again was the high street.
Yeah, in Hamilton.
Which is like full of these beautiful old stone buildings, but all the shop fronts are empty or really disused, or there was just like a ton of card shops.
Yeah, God, there was, yes. And like a horrible shopping centre.
Yeah, and they were telling us that the going through the council just now are plans to completely demolish this high street and turn it into like new build housing for people that aren't maybe from Hamilton but would live there as commuters to commute to Glasgow or Edinburgh. And that was the main thing they were talking about, because they were talking about how like this is the centre of the community. Hamilton used to be a really close-knit community, and there were pubs there that were really busy. And that was the thing that people are really concerned about. So like for me, that being an SNP constituency for the last 14 years, and the SNP MPs have, overseen that decline, why would you be then voting to keep the SNP in power in that constituency?
Because SNP were desperate to present this as like stop faragism. They were like Hamilton has a choice. It's like, do we legitimize reform here? And it was kind of like, it's kind of a tactic that I'm not sure works necessarily. And I kind of raised this with Swinney, and I don't think it actually did it particularly well, because it was just a thought at the moment. But we've kind of seen down south that the kind of the mainstream or the legacy party's approach to reform is like they're not playing the same game. Like reform are playing like, well, they're running that attack ad on Anna Sarwar, which isn't true.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of a bit kind of like pearl clutching about reform from the legacy parties. And I really think the SNP response to reform has been like, oh goodness me, do you remember that, like the meeting they had, like civic leaders, about like how to reject reform, I think a couple of months ago, that Swinney chaired, and it was like, and that allowed Farage to be like, look, this is the establishment reacting to us, and I'm not sure that the SNP or the parties in Scotland have worked out a way to present like a positive case to not vote reform. It's like, you shouldn't vote reform because it's immoral to vote reform seems to be the only argument at the moment. And I'm not sure that's convincing, certainly not a convincing reason to vote for the status quo, because that's what voting for the SNP is at the moment, is voting for more of the same.
I feel like the SNP have a chance, though, to, unlike Labour or Scottish Labour, they have a chance to actually kind of meet reform like on that level, like as being outside the two-party system, having elements of populism to their party, and also being able, when reform say, yeah, we'd lift the 2-child cap, the SNP can say, well, we're doing the same thing. Like I think in Scotland, they've offset the two-child benefit cap. So they can actually meet reform on that material level. When reform push like socialist, quote unquote, policies like that, the SNP can meet them there, but then can also say, and we wouldn't privatise the NHS, and we would actually allow sensible migration into the UK.
I'm not sure it has legs if you're the government. I'm not sure. If you, like, at this point, I do wonder if they're just too tired. If they have been in power for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And, like, they are the most prominent, like, if you think about growing up, like, they were the most prominent party for sure. Like, since all of our adult lives in Scotland, like, everything people know is about kind of Scottish politics is the SNP. And if you are looking for change, and if you're not happy about, like, if you're not happy with the state of anything, and you have a chance to vote against the government, I really don't think you would. If you're not happy with your life and you want change, why would you vote for the status quo? And I think the SNP have a really difficult time in rejecting that. And also, if you look at, like, support for independence is, like, polling about, I think it's about 51%, 52% at the moment, and that, like, the SNP's polling is not near that. It's been kind of completely decoupled now. So people are looking for change, and whether that change is seeking Scottish independence or going and voting for reform, I'm not sure the SNP has the can straddle that currently.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because the one thing because in 2026 there's Holyrood elections in May, and I think the one thing that the SNP does have in its favour is that a lot of its talent, its biggest names, Mary Black and Ian Blackford, people like that, they either stood down or lost their seats at the general election. And then you have people like Stephen Flynn and Stephen Gethins, very talented communicators, who have said that they're going to run in the Holyrood elections as well. So you have this kind of huge talent pool, which I actually think Holyrood has been lacking. Like in those First Minister elections, there was no one really that was very talented that could take over from Nicola Sturgeon, because they were all
What are you saying about Hamza Yusuf or Ash Regan or Kate Forbes?
Yeah, Ash Regan.
Oh my God, you know about Ash Regan?
wait. So I think I'll just finish my point and then we should talk about Ash Regan. But now that talent pool has been freed up for the Holyrood elections. But ultimately, I think what we could see is just a replayment of what we saw in Hamilton, which is basically Reform, Labour and the SNP all getting about a third of the vote.
So Ash Regan, Ash Regan used to be an SNP MSP and is now in Alba. She ran to be leader, lost to Kenny McCaskill, who's the Scottish Justice Secretary who freed Al-Megrahi. So now we're all caught up. She's proposing that Scotland, I guess it's Scotland because we wouldn't apply to the rest of the UK. That's how it works. Big brain. Move to a Nordic model of legislation about sex work and prostitution, which is it'd be criminal to buy sex. It's like it puts the onus on the consumer to not do it, basically. And there's been kind of some criticism from sex workers suggesting, and some of this criticism was presented to Ash Regan, and the reporter said, "Aren't you worried that this will just drive sex workers underground?" And she said,
should we get out the exact quote?
Yeah.
Okay. It's kind of unbelievable. Did she also run, when she was an SNP MP, did she also run
to be First Minister?
Yeah.
Yeah, she did. It was her versus Yusuf and
Kate Forbes.
And she wanted to set up an independence readiness thermometer in Glasgow, which she was like, as we get closer to being ready for independence, like the mercury will rise, as if that's not like entirely subjective.
Yeah, it's some vibes.
As if that in some way can be scientific.
So she said in response to that reporter, "You cannot possibly drive prostitution underground. If you had a lot of women in underground cellars with a locked door, how would the punters get them?" And then the reporter explained what driving underground means. It doesn't literally mean putting women underground.
Aren't you concerned that pimps will lock up these women in underground cages?
Yeah, and then when he explained what pushing things underground actually means. He asked her, does that make sense? And she said, no, not really.
Oh. Wouldn't it be sick if she was First Minister?
Yeah.
It would just be like the most literal, just magic.
Yeah.
It would just go like this colossal glass statue filled with like poisonous mercury emitting fumes into Buchanan Street in Glasgow. And she's just like busting open like cellars. Yeah. What a wonderful woman.
Her mind.
Her mind is. There's also a great moment in the debate between Hamza Yusuf, Kate Forbes, and Ash Regan. And Kate Forbes is kind of like I don't know if evangelical is the right word, but she's very Christian, Christian. And there's a question in the debate about faith, and Hamza Yusuf's Muslim. He talks about his Islamic faith, and then Kate Forbes talks about her faith. And Ashley, I don't know why it made me laugh at the time, but Ashley was just like, I don't have a faith, but I respect them. Which is obviously so fine to say, and like probably like the most commonly held view. But it was a bit. I was like, this is a bit unfair almost that this question about faith, and you just you can't use your time.
Yeah.
Because like, what can she say about Islam or like evangelical Christianity? Should we talk about some of the people we met in Hamilton?
Yeah.
And I think for like a bit, this is probably something we should have done at the beginning, like to describe Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse. There's sort of like 3 industrial working class towns in the west of Scotland, kind of in the central belt, and they're all different, all very different. They're all Larkhall is like a big like very Rangers, very like unionist, so much so that there's a branch of the local subway that can't be painted green. It's painted black. It's probably the only subway in the world without a green shop front. I think one of the most striking vignettes we saw was we met 2 men. One man called Calvin, who's a young guy wearing a Celtic top. As Calvin loved Celtic. He like took my phone. He asked to follow us on Instagram afterwards, and he's wearing a Celtic top, Celtic phone background, over a different Celtic picture underneath the apps. It was good. And he was saying he doesn't vote. He's never voted. And his pal or his much older friend or his dad or his like granddad, I don't actually know their relationship, was indignant that Calvin had never voted.
Yes.
And I think that's the generational split in kind of participating in politics that parties are really going to have to try and surmount, because the old guy was saying, oh, you've got to vote, got to vote. Out of like a sense of like civic duty, you have to engage with the democratic process. Whereas Calvin was saying, what on earth would I vote for? What's going to change? What's going to change? And that apathy is insidious, certainly amongst young people. And that's who I think Reform are doing very well at converting. Calvin said he wasn't going to vote this time either, and he didn't seem terribly taken with Reform. But Reform are a lot of their support is coming from did not votes.
Yes.
You can talk all you want about who's going from the Conservatives to Reform, Labour to Reform, but it's their conversion of the did not votes, which I think is really buoying them in the polls.
Absolutely. I thought that whole conversation, and if you've not seen Ed's piece, go and watch it, was really interesting because it did feel like a sort of microcosm of much larger debates about men and their politics, because we saw the older man was what you would probably describe as your traditional Labour voter, and Hamilton, Larkhall and Stonehouse was until 14 years ago like absolutely solid Scottish Labour territory, and you saw that in him. The I'm voting Labour because we've always voted Labour here. Older man who felt a civic duty to engage. You saw Calvin, who was that apathetic, disengaged, these people are offering me nothing young male voter. And then we were joined by a third young man who had overheard our conversation and really wanted to let us know that he was totally taken by Reform and absolutely believed everything that they were offering and believed everything that Nigel Farage said and genuinely believed that Reform were going to offer change, because he kept saying that all these other politicians promise things and never deliver, but he seemed to believe with his whole heart that Nigel Farage was different.
It's also, he was talking about stop the votes. And immigration is like an interesting issue in Scotland because like certainly Scotland maybe more so than other places in the UK, kind of needs immigration to sustain
Yeah.
public services because of like population
Yeah.
issues. But now there's a greater, like there's I think it's 51% of Scots back the UK government's kind of plans to cap immigration, and the SNP government like railed against them. And when I asked John Swinney about that, he said, well, I've got to be realistic about this. I know that Scotland needs immigration, so I'm not just going to like follow the whims of of the Scots who don't know what's good for them, which I thought was quite like a brave stance to take, to kind of position yourself that's at odds with the public. And hearing people talking about stop the boats in like the central belt of Scotland, like they're
Yeah.
not coming up the Clyde.
No.
Like it was interesting hearing that rhetoric, especially like Scotland is so overwhelmingly white.
Yeah, it's insanely homogenous.
Yeah. And whether that rhetoric can kind of catch, because that's all consumed passively. Like you're not seeing the evidence of that. Like we're like we live in London. Like you can see the evidence of immigration all around us. Like if you go to like Whitechapel, you can see like signs in Bangladesh or whatever, and like there's just literal evidence. But in Hamilton, like there's very little.
I think it's interesting because support for anti-immigration policies is the highest in constituencies that have the lowest level of immigration. And I think that's because when you live somewhere like London, it's really hard to buy the myths that you see on social media about the damage that immigration is causing. Or like if you live in London, you're not buying the like quote unquote Londonistan like hate that's on Twitter because you're like, oh, I live here. Like I know these people. Like you can't buy that. But if you are living somewhere with very low immigration, it's a lot easier to believe what you're seeing online. And also to maybe feel like that chaos is going to encroach onto you soon.
And I guess if you kind of engage with immigrants in a really like banal setting, like if you like say something to a woman in a burqa like as you're getting on the tube, it kind of normalizes it or something like that. Or like I walk past, sometimes there's like a basketball court near my house, and there must be like an Islamic school nearby, because it's just like 100 boys in like Islamic dress playing basketball, and they're like shrieking and screaming. But if you just saw a still image of like 100 boys kind of like, I don't know, in Islamic dress, and that's the only way you're engaging with people not from the country, that can be twisted.
Exactly.
Yeah. Would you call it there?
Yeah.
Have you got anything else to add?
No, that actually was very in-depth.
Yeah, I think it was well done. Well done, everybody. You're welcome.
Watch Ed's interviews. Watch the report.
Expertly filmed by Laura.
Thank you.
Oh, this is kind of funny. I text someone from Scottish Labour asking if they're having a big night out, and he responded with not a GIF, just kind of like an image of Homer Simpson in a Rasta hat. So take from that what you will. Yeah, that's all from us. We'll be back on Monday. Thank you guys so much for listening. Remember to like, subscribe, give us some feedback on the subreddit.
Yeah.
Make sure we hit those KPIs, guys. That's on you.
Yeah, put us in your dissertation.
Yeah. Dedicate your dissertation to us. Have you seen, do you get TikToks of like people uploading their dissertation dedications? Do you ever get my algorithm? My algorithm gives me them because I read them all, and they really make me laugh because it's just like they're the most like insane. Like one girl seemed to have done a dissertation about Harry Potter and dedicated it to Daniel Radcliffe, which really made me laugh. Did you do a dedication in your dissertation?
I did, yeah.
Was it cool? Was it a cool one or was it a flowery one?
It's probably lame now. I don't want to say it because you're going to laugh at me.
No, you know, I did.
What?
This is when I still used Snapchat because I was, 21. I put my Snapchat story, the first 5 people to reply get a dedication in my dissertation.
I love that.
So it was like my friend from my year abroad's friend who I'd met twice, a girl I did a play with, one of my friends from school, one girl who was a good friend of mine, and like, I can't remember the 5th, maybe a friend from a year abroad.
I love
but
that.
Just people like I hadn't spoken to in like 6 months are in my dissertation dedication.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, that's good. That's the kind of banter that you can expect on the PoliticsJOE podcast. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.